I'm glad this is. All right. Um, so today I've decided to do something which is more current events, but also with a religious theme. And if some of this looks a little familiar, it's because we have visited some of this material about 3 years ago, but not all of it. Most of it's new, I think, but some of it, the back is something that you've seen before. So we're going to look at colonialism and its role in causing religious strife in northern Africa. And we're going to be taking a look at that. And this is like happening right now, so this is really current kinds of stuff. So in general, we can say that Africa has a reputation for having political instability. There are pockets of stability in Africa where things are stable and things are fine, but there's other places which make the news which has instability, political instability. And the other thing we should mention, everybody has, Africa has a reputation of being very poor, with a lot of really poor people. And my asterisk there is to remind me to say that we should note, though, that not everybody in Africa is poor. And in fact, by 2030, which is only 4 short years away, they're estimated that over 40% of all Africans will be middle class, and which is probably not our image of Africa, but it is definitely the reality. So keep in mind that even though they have more poverty relative to what we're used to in the United States, there's a lot of people in Africa that are doing just fine, okay, economically. But we're going to look at the legacy of colonialism and see what role that has played in causing this political instability and the poverty in Africa. So here's a list of factors, and we're not going to look at all of them. Let me see. We're going to spend some time with this one, indiscriminate boundaries of colonies and then states, which forced together a wide variety of ethnicities, religions, and cultures and asked them to form a country. And that's always difficult to do. We're going to look briefly at the relative new. We're going to mention some of these. The 2, 3, and 4 we'll mention kind of briefly. And then we'll spend a lot of time with religious conversion and fundamentalism. Okay? So that's where we're going to go with this, just so you'll know. And we'll see how this works out. So first, colonialism in Africa. This is a huge topic. And when I lectured on this, it would take like 3 or 4 days to get through all this material. So I've just really cut it down to the bare bones. But when we think about colonialism in Africa, we usually are thinking about a phase that took place in the 1800s, and in which Africa was seen as being in play by European powers. Like, okay, let's all go to Africa and we're going to get rich. We're going to loot their resources and we're going to take all their stuff, and it's going to fuel the Industrial Revolution, which was really ramping up in Europe in the 1800s. And so that was the whole point of colonialism, was to extract resources and ship it back to the home country. And this included labor as well. The labor started much earlier in the 1600s, when they were stealing people out of Africa and selling them into slavery. But even in the 1800s, there was a huge market in labor to fuel the factories of Europe and the United States. There's a long period of colonial domination. By 1884 is a magic date, because what they would do in Europe is they would send their armies and their merchants and their people and their colonists, and they would send them to Africa and then try to just see how much territory they could get. They would just grab whatever they could find. And what was happening was countries were running into each other and fighting over each other. There was a major war in the Sudan here in the 1870s between the French and the British. The British wanted to connect all of their colonies north-south, all the way through from the southern part to the northern part of Africa. And the French wanted to connect their colonies all the way this way, from the east to the west. And they ran into each other in Sudan. And the British won, and so Sudan became a British colony. But they could see that war was going to be inevitable. And so they had something called the Berlin Conference, in which they all sat down and they basically just started dealing. You know, we'll give you this land if you give us this land, and so forth. And they worked out the map of Africa. And this is what it looked like afterwards. This is the map of Africa that came out of the 1884 Berlin Conference. The black lines, of course, are modern countries, but the colors that tell you who had what in terms of colonial holdings in Africa. The only places that weren't colonies was Liberia, which was free, although Liberia was so closely associated with the United States that it effectively functioned as a colony of the United States. The only one that was truly free was Ethiopia, which managed to maintain its freedom except for maybe 5 or 6 years when the Italians went in and took it over, and then the Ethiopians kicked them out. So Ethiopia remained free and became sort of a shining example of freedom for Africans everywhere. And there's a whole nother story we go into on the Rastafarian religion as a result of that, and that's something we're not going to do right now, okay? So this is what the map of Africa looked like after the Berlin Conference of 1884. That was designed to try to prevent warfare between the European countries. It didn't work very well. World War I was fought partially about colonial holdings in Africa. And a lot of World War I was actually fought in Africa between the German colonies here in what is now Tanzania and Namibia, and the British colonies, especially here in Uganda, in that area. So they actually fought quite a bit of the war there. But the colonial legacy is very strong in Africa. And we're going to look at these things, national versus state boundaries, which are extremely important in looking at political instability. And then the lack of infrastructure development. What the colonial powers would do is they would make roads and cities by the resources so they could extract them, and then nothing else. And so the railroads went from the port to the resource, and there was no other infrastructure in the country for travel or transportation, things like that. And they were trying to loot the resources. They did a really good job of that. Resources were flowing out of Africa back to Europe and to the United States during the 1800s and 1900s. And they established exploitive economic patterns which were self-perpetuating even after they became independent states and became independent free countries. These exploitive economic patterns were continued, and so we still see this extraction sort of thing. It's still going on today. The big change recently is a major new player is China, and China is all over Africa right now, and so they're kind of a new player in this all this thing. But they're doing basically the same kinds of things. And then we're going to focus on the ethnic and religious strife and political instability which came about as a result of this colonial legacy. But first, let's look at national versus state boundaries, and we got to do some definitions, okay? Because we need to know what we're talking about there. When you say state in the United States, we think of Wisconsin. We think of dropping our. We think of Wisconsin or New Hampshire or Alaska or whatever. That's not the real definition of a state. We have redefined that for an American context, but state actually means what we would think of when we say country. So the United States is a state, okay? Finland is a state, Russia is a state, and so forth. That's how that term is actually originally defined and really supposed to be used. We also have misdefined nation. Nation we think of means country, but it doesn't. Nation means an ethnic group in the land they control. So nation is an ethnic term, an ethnic political term. And that's how nation should be used. So you put those two together and you have something called a nation state, which is a country that has only basically one ethnic group. Okay? That's what a nation state is. Nationalist, and that word comes from nation, of course, nationalists, including those currently in the United States, often see that as a goal for their countries, even when they're not nation states. They try to manufacture the country as a nation state with one ethnic group and usually one religious idea and so forth. And that's currently happening in the United States. There aren't very many nation states in the world. It's rare to have nation states. Iceland, Japan, Thailand, and Mongolia are all examples, but you're hard pressed to find any other examples of it. And the reason why is because the human population is so diverse. It's just not logical that you're going to have one ethnic group in one country. That just doesn't play out. But there is a strong desire amongst nationalists for nation states, and that's common around the world, and it's a very big source of strife, because you take a multinational country and try to warp it into a nation state, and there's going to be a lot of problems. And that's what we're seeing right now in the United States. That's what is happening in the United States right now. There are no examples of nation states in Africa, with the possible exception of Lesotho.
Yeah.
Lesotho is very small, and it probably would qualify as a nation state. But as far as I know, that might be the only, even Djibouti, which is about the size of Lesotho, is not a nation state.
And Swaziland also?
Swaziland mostly is, it's close, but there are some other ethnic groups in especially the southwest part of Lesotho. So those are Lesotho and Swaziland, and they have different names now. And I apologize, I don't know the new names. They have ethnic names now. I'm not going to come up with them. But they're entirely surrounded by South Africa.
Lesotho is the same as Eswatini.
Eswatini, that's it. That's for Swaziland, right? Swaziland was a colonial name, and people tend to get rid of colonial names when they get their independence. They don't want a name that the British gave them, basically. There are nationalists in Africa who desire to make nation states, and this has been one of the sources of problems in Africa, for sure. So multi-ethnic state, this is the other kind of countries that you have, are countries with more than one significant ethnic group. Okay? All African countries are multi-ethnic with the possible exception of Lesotho. So, how do you get multi-ethnic states? There's three general ways you can do this. Territorial conquest. This is imperialism, basically, creating countries which are empires. And they do that by taking over other land and just continuing to expand and expand and expand. And they gobble up, usually indigenous people, in doing that. And the big question for empires is, what do we do with our indigenous people? And that's a whole nother story. We're not even going to go there today, but it's a huge issue. These 6 countries are, in order, the 6 largest countries in the world: Russia, Canada, China, USA, Brazil, and Australia. And they all formed in this way, by dominating other places, by expanding territorially, and by incorporating indigenous people. That automatically makes them multi-ethnic, okay? Because you've got all these Native Americans in there. what we did in the United States, and which is common around the world for nationalists who want to have their country be a nation state when it's not, is they just simply ignore. They usually lock away the indigenous people out of sight and try to ignore them as much as possible, which is what we did with Native Americans. The second way you get a multi-ethnic state is colonization, followed by imposed indiscriminate boundaries. This is what happened in Central and South America and in Africa, okay? And we'll come back to that with Africa in a moment. And the third way you get a multi-ethnic state is by immigration into the state. At one time, France and UK probably qualified as nation states. They certainly are not now because they have had so much immigration. And the United States has had immigration and so forth, okay?
I think the United Kingdom probably never would have actually been a nation state.
Oh, actually, my terms are imprecise. England was a nation state,
Oh, line there. Yes.
but UK never was, and you're absolutely right about that. Absolutely right, because from the beginning, UK, the way it worked, the United Kingdom formed in 1707, I believe. So it's been around for all those years, and it's Scotland, Wales, England, and then later Northern Ireland joined. And so you have Welsh, Scottish, Irish, and English. That automatically makes you multi-ethnic. So England would be at one time, but it's not now. So it's common for nationalistic groups and multi-ethnic states to try to force it to become a nation state. That's the goal. That's what we want. We want one ethnic group, one religion, and we want that, and because that's the way it should be, according to nationalist groups. This always leads to dissension, persecution, and sometimes armed conflict, because there's people who aren't part of that ethnic group and not part of that religion, and what do we do with those people, and how we deal with that. And this is often linked to religion, nation states, whether they're real or imagined in the fevered dreams of nationalists. They often are assumed that they have a religious base, one religious belief, which is the appropriate one. In the United States, it's Protestant Christianity. That is the appropriate religion for the United States, according to most people. Nation states are dominated by one ethnic group and one religious belief, and that's what we mean when we say in the Pledge of Allegiance that we are one nation under God. That is a nation-state statement. And what we have always wanted to do in the United States was think of ourselves as a nation, which is why we took that term and applied it to the country when it doesn't fit, because we've always wanted to believe we were a nation or a nation state, but we never have been. But the Pledge of Allegiance, which was written in the 1890s and was written specifically to counteract immigration coming in, they wanted very much to have people swear allegiance to the United States because all these strange people, Muslim Catholics, were coming in, and they were different, and they didn't look like everybody else, and they didn't talk like everybody else, they didn't worship like everybody else. And so they wanted them to have to publicly swear allegiance to the United States. That's where the Pledge of Allegiance came from in the 1890s. And so they put this in there, one nation under God, indivisible with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Yeah.
Can I add a side note?
Sure.
So as a side note, if you look at the actual text of the Declaration of Independence, we the people of the United States of America. United is in small, states is in big.
Yeah.
Originally, we were planned to be just a grouping of
states.
States in the proper
Yeah.
country term.
Basically,
Grouping of countries.
basically a grouping of countries. Yeah.
But something changed between the Declaration of Independence.
Well, what changed was war, because you can't fight wars with all these small groupings. So they had a heck of a time in the Revolutionary War getting people from Vermont to sign up to go fight in South Carolina or something like that. That just didn't work. And they had a heck of a time getting the armies to stay and to be united. And so they had to, what they ended up doing was, as we fought wars, increasingly federal power got bigger and bigger and bigger at the expense of states, because it's the only way you can fight wars in the 19th and 20th century and 21st century. Originally, you're absolutely right. We were supposed to be a collection of countries, basically. So, and there's still people who scream about states' rights, and they're basically saying we want to have the right to say and do whatever we want to do in our state, you know, like it was a country, and the federal government can't say anything about it. And this is still a strong thing, especially in the South. States' rights in the West are especially strong in the South and the West. So nationalists who try to force multi-ethnic states into nation states do that by restricting immigration and deporting immigrants who don't fit the perceived ethnic, cultural, or religious model of what this country's supposed to look like. So nationalists always are trying to get rid of immigration and get rid of immigrants around the world. And currently in the United States, we're doing this. So. Then isolating indigenous groups, as well as forcing indigenous people to assimilate. And we have a long and very difficult history of that in the United States with Native Americans. But other countries have done the same thing in other indigenous groups. And developing a religious-based society and societal institutions, including government. In other words, if you're going to have a nation state, you basically are saying you really want a national religion. Because a state religion, essentially. Almost always only one religious tradition is accepted. So that's what happens, and you can see why this might be divisive and difficult for a nation to go through this process. This is happening. Nationalism has grown in the last 15 or 20 years around the world, but it's never not been there. It's just gotten more powerful in the last 15 or 20 years. And we're seeing it in Africa too. A lot of Africa's problems and political instability can be chalked up to this. Nationalists who are trying to force multi-ethnic states to become nation states. It's not that simple, but that's a major factor. The point is, okay.
Within the first people, they're super different.
Probably, yeah. I mean, everybody else came from another country, basically.
And nationalists
So how do they
just
decide
don't
who
like.
they're supposed to be? Are they all supposed to be Swedes
Oh, believe me,
or all-
you talk to nationalists, they'll tell you who you're supposed to be. Believe me, I've just been reading some.
Even people up in government powerful, their lives are different.
Oh, yeah.
Well, take Vice President Vance, for example. He's married to an Indian woman, an Asian Indian woman, and he is hated by the far right in the United States for doing that because he is a race traitor. They've used that term applied to him, and they are looking for somebody else to be the Republican nominee in 2028, even though he's the heir apparent, you know. He converted to Catholicism, which is also problematical. For the far right. The far right has a thing where they greet each other by saying Christ the King. And that's a very specific, fundamentalist, evangelical, Protestant, Christian thing to say. And so that's who they are religiously. Christ the King. Yeah, oh yeah, but Christ the King means something else. Means something else. It's code, in a sense. Yeah, you're too Christian.
I'm trying to think about Christianity in the right proper liberal sense, and they're using it as the nation state inquisition sense.
Yeah. Yeah, well, a lot of people do have a problem with this. This is why it causes dissension. This is one reason why we have so much dissension in the United States right now. Because this is not...
Because there's people that want that, and there's people that don't want that.
Right, right.
I hear it every day, yeah.
So let's look at Africa.
That's a messy map.
This is a messy map. And it's messy, which is our point. This is a map of Africa. The dark lines here are the current state boundaries. So here's Egypt and Libya and Sudan and so forth. I can't forget Malawi.
So right now, Chris is in,
Yeah, she's probably where?
she's right here right now,
Okay, right on the border with Congo and Zambia,
the DRC in Zambia.
DRC. Yeah, when you say Congo, you usually mean the Republic of Congo, which is another country which is right up here.
So the
See
Democratic
Congo
Republic
right
of
there?
Congo is,
DRC is this.
used to be Zaire, for
See-
all of you that remember that.
See, it says DR Congo right there.
And it's got this little finger that comes down into Zambia, and that's where Chris is at, in a town called Kitwe, which is in Zambia.
And I should point out that the Ebola that you've been hearing about is up in here.
Yeah.
It's right up here in the northeastern part of DR Congo and Uganda, in this area. It's about 1,200, 1,000 miles, 1,200 miles from where Chris is, in case you're worried. You know, DR Congo is the second largest country in Africa after Algeria, and they're almost exactly the same size. Algeria is, 5 square miles bigger or something like that. And so it's a really big country, really big country.
There's a lot of people, and there's a lot of like jungle and other kinds of things. Like Algeria's just got a lot of sand
Yep, and oil.
and oil, and Congo's got a lot of minerals and other things.
DR Congo is really rich in minerals,
Yes.
especially important minerals.
Yes. That is a lot of nations.
So all these other things are the national boundaries. All these little things, those are where ethnic groups live and have their territory. And you can see here's Swaziland, and you see it's almost entirely one ethnic group, but even Lesotho has a little bit of a thing. And even Djibouti up here is split between two ethnic groups. So it's hard to find a nation state in Africa, a true nation state. But there are lots of people who want very much. And what's going on in Sudan right now, if we have time, we'll talk about that, is pretty much to trying to establish a nation state out of Sudan, and you've got all of that to work with. So what you're talking about is putting together a whole bunch of, this is what the colonial powers of Europe did. England was able to control, Germany was able to control what is now Namibia. And they just got their boundaries pushed that far, and then the Berlin Conference said that's going to be your boundaries. And up here is Angola was Portuguese. And they put all this together in a colony, and then when independence came, those colonial boundaries were maintained. And so you have a country with, look at all those ethnic groups in Angola, each with their own ethnicity, language, different languages. They're all different languages, and different takes on religion and so forth, and culture. And you're putting them together and say, now form a country. Can you imagine how hard that would be? If you don't even speak the same language? Africa is by far and away the most diverse continent on earth in terms of language, culture, and religion. By a long margin, that's true. And so it was very difficult. I mean, look at Nigeria, for crying out loud. I don't even know, there's hundreds of ethnic groups in Nigeria. So you can see there's going to be dissension and difficulty, and this is a legacy of colonialism. Okay.
I mean, humans have been in Africa the longest.
By far.
By
longest.
So this is
All humans came out of Africa. We're all Africans. If you go back, trace your ancestry back far enough, you all go back to Africa, without exception.
these are the folks that didn't leave.
These are the folks that
Most of them.
didn't leave, and so we've talked about this now. I just want to mention another second point is the relative newness of the countries. These countries only exist since the 50s and 60s and 70s, 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So that's when they got their independence and they became countries and they were able to write their constitutions and they were able to try to build a country. And I'll tell you, if you think about it, this is one of the hardest things in the world to do is build a country. It is very difficult to do. And especially, you have all kinds of things you have to work out. Who are we? What are we going to be? How do we bring all these ethnic groups together? What about the 14 different languages in our country? How are we going to navigate that? And so forth and so on. And to give you some example of how difficult new countries have and how long it takes to establish a country, think about the United States. We became, according to the current hoopla, 250 years ago, we became a country. That was when the Declaration of Independence was signed. A better date would have been when the Constitution went into effect in 1798. But
Or when we signed the treaty with the UK.
the UK saying we were
No longer
independent,
Yeah.
because if we had lost the Revolutionary War, the Declaration of Independence would have been thrown away and nobody would have ever heard of it. So there's all kinds, but that's okay. We'll take the Declaration of Independence, 250 years. But the country really got established when the Constitution was signed. That's the important document. And that was in 1787. So it was years later.
So if you think about it, between 76 and 87, right, there's 11 years where we were a country, but not really.
But not a country.
Not a country. And so when you think of the newness of these countries in the first 11 years of their existence.
And even farther, I mean, look at American history. In 1806, the sitting vice president of the United States and the commander-in-chief of the American military conspired to break the country in half to launch a civil war that they would take over one half of the country and rule it as dictators. Did you ever hear that in history? You don't talk about that much. That was Aaron Burr, who was one of the craziest politicians we ever had. He was vice president. The commander-in-chief of the military at that point was a paid spy for Spain also. So he was spying for Spain. And so it was an interesting sort of thing. Only by luck of the draw that didn't happen. Then in 1812, we went to war with England again. And in 1814, the English invaded our country, burned our national capital, and destroyed Washington, D.C. What was there was of it? This is not a stable country. In 1830, South Carolina came with a whisper from seceding from the United States. And we almost had the Civil War started in 1830. And we did have the Civil War then in 1860 because we couldn't figure out, are we going to be free or slave? We just couldn't figure that issue out. And that's what the Civil War was all about, was trying to decide, are we going to be a free country or a slave country? And that's 80 years after the Declaration of Independence was signed. So European countries were going like, I don't know if they're going to make it or not. They didn't have any confidence that we were going to be a real country. It wasn't until after the Civil War, when finally slavery was decided, that the United States was judged to be a stable country.
80 years.
80 years. And so a country in Africa that was founded its independence in 1960, what's 80 years from 1960 is 2040. So they still haven't even had their 80 years yet. Of course they're going to be unstable. They're still working this stuff out. Give them some time, and leave them alone. for the most part. Political corruption, ethnic rivalries among Africans. This is because of these indiscriminate boundaries. My ethnic group wants to rule. No, my ethnic group wants to rule. Okay, let's have a fight. We'll see who gets to rule. And then this ethnic group doesn't like the outcome, so they fight too. You know, that's what you get a lot.
Or this ethnic group that is common with an ethnic group in another country.
Right, and they want to form a country out of their ethnic group. The Congo people
Yes.
is a good example of that. They live in Angola and in DR Congo and in the Republic of Congo. And they would love to be their own country and have a real country of Congo, not, you know, what we've got. But that's not going to happen.
And the other one that comes to my mind is from the podcast. Rwanda's
Oh,
Hutus,
Hutus and Tutsis.
Tutsis also share a border and have fellow ethnic folks in the DR Congo.
Right.
And so part of the militias and all of the strife in the northeastern part of the DR Congo, where Ebola is also related to the fact that the ethnic groups in Rwanda want to make an ethnic state out of their groups in the
Yeah.
DR Congo.
Absolutely true. And Congo, DR Congo right now is having a rather nasty civil war going on.
Yeah.
So we're not going to talk about that, but we should mention it. By the way, do you want to know, since World War II, and all the time, history since World War II, what has been the most fatal war in history anywhere in the world? The answer is the Second Congolese Civil War, which took place in the 1980s. 5.4 million people died. That is astonishing. That is astonishing. The other issue is population growth. We don't have time to go into that right now. Oh, I'm running out of time. Population growth, Africa is growing way faster than any other region in the world. It's increased its population by 50% since 2000, and it's continuing to increase. And that means things are more crowded, land is being used much more intensely, and you have environmental decay, and climate change is a huge part of that because Africa is the most fragile region in the world for climate change. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about that. So here's climate change in Africa. Who estimates, World Health Organization, estimates currently about 250,000 people die every year from climate change in the world. So we're losing 250,000 people a year to climate change right now. And that's going to get much worse in the future. A majority of those are in Africa. I don't know, I couldn't find an exact number of estimates, but a majority are in Africa. But that's going to increase. It's estimated by 2050, there'll be an additional 500,000 deaths in Africa just from the spread of malaria. And malaria is spreading because of climate change. So that's just one cause. So we're talking about millions of people dying from climate change in our life, potentially in our lifetimes. I don't know if I'll make 2050, but it's not inconceivable. But Matt certainly will. And we should note that Africa contributes the least carbon dioxide to the atmosphere of any continent, and yet is the most vulnerable continent to climate change impacts. So it's the developing world, it's our carbon dioxide that's causing this to happen over there, and that's another form of colonialism. You know, you can really see it that way. So I just wanted to mention all that too, because all of this adds to the instability. So the last thing, finally, is religious conversion and fundamentalism, which is the point of the talk. And we only have 20 minutes to go. How many religions are there in the world? Well, between 4 and 10,000. But the huge majority, 84% of all the Earth's people, are one of these 6 religions right here. Okay, so even though there's thousands of religions, depending on how you count them, most people are one of these 6. And 60% of the world's population are either Christian or Muslim. So those are by far the 2 dominant religions in the world, by a long margin. And then add to that the almost 1.5 billion people who identify as secular, non-religious, agnostic, or atheist. And you put all that together, it leaves only 1% for all the other thousands of religions. So this is kind of what the world looks like religiously. What's that? Judaism is not a particularly large religion. It's got about 14 million people right now. It makes it smaller than the Mormons. Mormons have about 18 million. So, and that's a significant amount of people. I mean, our church has, 250,000. So, we would love to have 14 million people. but they don't come close to these kinds of numbers. And this is the part that we've done before, about 3 years ago. There's 4 major kinds of religions in the world. Animism, like Shinto, polytheism, Hinduism, monotheism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Sikhism are the 4 major monotheistic religions in the world today. The natural law religions, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism. We're not going to go through all that again. I'm sure you remember every word I said 3 years ago, so you've got that nailed.
Probably a YouTube video of it.
I'm sure there is. But if you look at the distribution of religions in the world today, Christianity is the blue, red, and purple. That's Protestant, this is Catholic, that's Orthodox. Okay? So that's that. Green is Islam. And then this is Hinduism and Buddhism, Chinese religion, and Buddhism is down here and here. So, but if you look at this, on every single continent, we're not counting Antarctica right now, on every single continent, either Islam or Christianity is the dominant religion. That's how extensive those 2 religions are, okay? So remember, monotheism is one God, means one God. By far and away the most dominant religious form in the world today, by a long margin. And the idea behind monotheism is an infinitely powerful and omnipotent God who is also intimately involved with human beings. So there's no need for other gods. So God can take care of the universe and the galaxies and all that kind of stuff. And he can also hear my prayer when I say, please don't let me, do something stupid or something like that. He can hear that as well. That's the whole point of monotheism. So you don't need other gods. Polytheism doesn't have that, and we're not going to go into that right now. It's absolutely central to all 4 major monotheistic religions. First, for Judaism, first of the 10 Commandments, you shall have no gods before me. Christianity, from John, this is eternal life, that you know you're the only true God. Islam, the statement of faith begins with there is no God but Allah. Sikhism, the first line of their statement of faith, says there is only one God. So this is fundamental to these 4 religions. Now, why are they so dominant today? The focus on one God has real implications. And we're making a point here we're going to get back to. Huge emphasis on the sacred book of scriptures as an authority, the words of God. If there is one God and one truth, then God is for all people. So that means there tend to be, they call them universalizing religions. It means for all cultures, all times, all places. The reason why Judaism is a small religion is because it's really isolated to Israel and people who have a connection to Israel. Although the United States has more Jews than Israel does, but that's beside the point. But you get the point. And Christianity and Islam are not that way. Okay. So monotheistic religions are far more missionary-minded than any other form of religion. That's less true for Judaism. Judaism they don't send missionaries out to knock on doors to say, let me tell you about my faith. They don't do that. Sikhism doesn't do that either. But Christianity and Islam have an overt imperative that you have to share the faith. You have to. This is part of what it means to be a Christian or a Muslim. So the fact that they're more missionary means they have more converts. So they're bigger. And it also means that Christianity and Islam come into conflict over converts, especially in Africa. So there's tension between Christian and Islamic missionaries. Here's a book talking about the killing of Muslim missionaries. Here's a book talking about the killing of Christians, both set in Africa. So both sides, there's conflict on both sides, right? Monotheistic religions have a much greater tendency towards fundamentalism. Fundamentalists believe that one God revealed one absolute truth which cannot be compromised in any way, and they know what that truth is. Characteristic of fundamentalism includes inerrancy of Scripture, commitment to reclaim space for their religion, either physical or cultural space. That's really important in the tension that's going on in Africa. A refusal to compromise. Absolute divine truth cannot be compromised. If God said it, it's so. You don't change that. So there's active fundamentalism in all four major monotheistic religions. Hinduism has developed from a fundamentalist movement, and the current guy, Prime Minister Modi, is deeply connected to that. But they learned that from Islam and Christianity. So it wasn't intuitive in Hinduism to do that. So these two characteristics, requirement for missionary work and the tendency towards fundamentalism, both of which are derived from the importance of one God, one truth, and one Scripture for all the world, has historically made monotheistic religions generally less tolerant than other kinds of religions. And that is easy to demonstrate. So it needs to be emphasized at this point that all monotheistic religions, without exception, have at their core a commitment to peace, love, compassion, and community building. This is what they all are. All four of them have that commitment. And plenty of evidence in their scriptures that that's the way it's supposed to be. However, religious intolerance has always been common in monotheistic religions. How do you put those together? The reasons for that is because believers distort those central core teachings, or they ignore them if they don't want to follow them. And you have the influence of non-religious culture. And that's really big. I mean, the evangelical movement has been heavily influenced by non-religious culture, and vice versa. So a summary of this monotheistic stuff before we move on. Of all the types of religions, monotheism has by far the greatest emphasis on their sacred scriptures, missionary work, and fundamentalism. Probably because of that, they have the greatest amount of violence on people of other religions, and in general are the least tolerant type of religion. Because of the imperative to convert others in Christianity and Islam, these are by far the two largest religions in the world, so it's not surprising they come into conflict. And the conflict between Muslims and Christians is greatest in Africa. Both see the region as ripe for conversion. It should be noted again, one more time, let's say this, Christianity and Islam have at their core an imperative to nonviolence and compassion. So that's what a true believer would do. But it doesn't always get done. So we're going to look at Nigeria and South Sudan as our case studies. It's in a region of Africa called the Sahel. And we're going to look at negative impacts of the conflict. I should be remembered that both Muslim and Christian societies have accomplished no small amount of good in this region as well. Done a lot of good stuff. But the problems and the conflict is very real. So, brief review of religious history of Africa. Let's just say that in the time just after Jesus, Christianity spread across northern Africa, and there's lots of good evidence of that. Before about 650 AD, all of North Africa was Christian, basically. All of southern Africa was animistic, following animistic tribal religions. But from 650 to 750 AD, Islam, which originated here, spread across northern Africa and up into Spain, and you can see the spread here. So by 900, it was all of this. That's a form of colonialism, right there. Okay. And so today in Chad, which is the country right here, you have mosques and you have people worshiping and so forth. This is a map of the religious map of Africa today. The strong boundary here between the Christian central and southern part of Africa and the Muslim north. Okay. Where did the primary Christian influence come from? It came from colonization. Missionaries associated with the colonial powers took it upon themselves to go to the colonies and to convert people. And so again, this looks a look at the colonial map, and every single one of these had Christian missionaries who came from the European country or from the United States in the case of Liberia, and converted people. And so thanks to the Davistons, I had this picture. This is a Presbyterian church, is that correct? The Presbyterians were big in central and southern Africa. And so this is a church which was founded in the 1800s, or the people were converted in the 1800s by missionaries who came as Malawi was being taken over by the British. The other reason for Christian influence in Africa is American missionary work from the 1950s to the present, mostly from evangelicals. And so we have examples of evangelical missionaries here and here working in Africa. They have been enthusiastic about sharing evangelical Protestantism, and Matt can speak much more authoritatively about this than I can, but I think that evangelical Christianity is by far the largest form of Christianity in Africa today. Would you say that's true?
It's hard for me to speak about the whole continent because my experience in Malawi is that they were mostly Presbyterian.
Yeah.
And they were mostly Presbyterian in Malawi because
David Livingstone.
But you speak about the conflict between Islam and Christianity in that part of Africa. The slave trade was being perpetrated by Muslims.
Okay.
And Livingstone, being a good, Christian British person, was against the slave trade.
And by the time he was there, Britain had outlawed slavery.
And by the time he was there, Britain had outlawed slavery. So for Malawians, David Livingstone and his efforts kind of was also associated with the end of the slave trade. So they were very much connected to Presbyterianism.
This is good stuff. I didn't know this. Thank you.
And that's why, Malawi is very much Presbyterian, partially because of Livingstone's influence to end the slave trade in Malawi.
I know.
That's not, you go to Nigeria.
I was going to say, Nigeria is all Pentecostal and evangelical.
Kenya is also very Pentecostal. So, in those parts, and I would say, Western Africa, and those countries, and then Eastern Africa, I would say South and Central Africa is a little less Pentecostal
than
Western and Eastern Africa.
Thank you for that. I know that in Nigeria, a really common first name for men is Sunday, and that comes from their commitment to evangelical religion.
Go back to the map.
What, this one?
Yeah, because I'm short. This part, so this is where you get more of the evangelical Pentecostal, and then this part. And I think if you look, it's the areas where there's interactions between Islam and Christianity has a higher propensity for
this is good stuff.
fundamentalism. Whereas you get in here where it's all Christian, it's more
probably a lot of Anglican too.
Yeah, this is a lot less of the fundamentalism.
Okay.
Where you get the interactions is where you see it.
Good stuff. Thank you. I didn't know that, and I didn't have that, so that's good to know. Okay, so
sorry.
The Sahel is this region here, which is a transition zone between the Sahara Desert and the rainforest. And it means, in Arabic, it means beach. And they call it that because it's like the beach of the Sahara Desert, where it meets the water, the humid environment. It's this orange region through here, which is semi-arid climate. It has this kind of climate. It is a difficult place to make a living. What's natural there is nomadic herding, and that's a pretty efficient use of the land. But what's happened was the French controlled much of the Sahel in their colonies. They were looking for money and for resources and for income, and so they forced people to shift to farming, and which was much more intensive use of the land and was not at all efficient for that kind of climate. And they also dramatically increased the population by their policies, which put more stress on land and resources. And as a result, the Sahel has seen, since 1970, 10 major environmental disasters, which have killed about 1.2 million people at least. And they're coming so fast now that the crisis is basically permanent. It's always going to be there. And climate change is a major part of this, by the way. And this is causing the crises, and this is causing instability. Because people are starving to death, they're not going to be happy. You know, I've thought about this. I told my students this. The first time I can't even talk about this. First time a person sees one of their children starve to death, you don't have to radicalize that person. They're going to pick up a gun and they're going to go after somebody. You know, that's all it takes. And so that, if you have it 1.2 million times, you can see what the instability is. The droughts are coming faster because of climate change, because of stronger El Niños, and hold on to your hats because the projection is next year we're going to have one of the strongest El Niños in history. The evidence seems to be coming in, climatic evidence is coming in for that. It's likely to be the warmest year in human history next year. And so we're going to get another one of these humanitarian crises next year, almost certainly in the Sahel. And of course, desertification, it's turning into desert is what's happening, and which of course makes it very difficult for people to live. And this makes for civil unrest. Okay, so the Sahel is exactly where Muslim and Christian missionary activity meet in Africa. I finally got to the point of the whole thing, and it's time to quit. So, but the Sahel is here, and I'm going to try to summarize this really fast now. And it's right where all of this is happening. And so you have all this civil unrest. You have desperately poor people who are being hammered by environmental problems and lack of land and difficulties and ethnic rivalries, and all that's going on. And you've got a lot of instability, and so as a result, both Muslim missionaries and Christian missionaries see that as a ripe area for conversion, because you know, people like that are willing to look for something to give their life meaning. And so this is where the conflict comes in. Since we're out of time, I'm going to just summarize the rest of the talk from this slide, okay? So Nigeria, you have a Christian south and a Muslim north, and you have strong fundamentalism, and fundamentalist forms of religion are particularly appealing because it's absolute. It's absolute. It has the answers, you know, and that's particularly appealing. So you have a lot of fundamentalist Muslims and fundamentalist Christians which demonize each other and which come into conflict. And and that's going on in Nigeria right now. Sudan at one time was all of this. This was all Sudan originally. But because of the demographics, the South Sudan was Christian and the North Sudan was Muslim. And so the capital, which is here at Khartoum, about there, never treated South Sudan very well. That province, it was part of Sudan, but they never treated it very well. And there was a lot of tension because of that religious identity between the two. Oh, and by the way, I should say here in Nigeria, the Muslims tend to be pastoralists and the Christians tend to be farmers. And so there's land use fighting going on as well because of that difference. And you get some of that here as well in this part of the Sahel over here. But anyway, in 2011, finally, there was 2 civil wars in Sudan, and finally in 2011, the government here said, okay, we're going to have a binding resolution. We're going to ask the people of South Sudan, do you want to be free or not? And I think the vote was 98.6% said yes, we want to be an independent country. So the people spoke, and it actually was a peaceful split. And South Sudan then emerges as a country. It's the newest country in the world. At this point, it's 15 years old. And since that time, they've had at least one major civil war as they're trying to sort out what kind of a country it's going to be. It's brand new. They're trying to figure out who we're going to be and whatever. And so that's happening in South Sudan. And South Sudan is a difficult place. It's one of the places, by the way, that we're shipping immigrants from the United States, is to South Sudan. It's punitive because there's nothing in South Sudan for them. These are not people from South Sudan. These are people from Guatemala or going to South Sudan or whatever. And it's punitive just to punish them because South Sudan is, at this point, I think it is the second most fragile country in the world after Somalia. And it is the lowest country on the Human Development Index of any country in the world. And in fact, the bottom 6 countries on the Human Development Index are all in the Sahel. And they're all featuring these same kinds of problems. Okay, so it's all kinds of really wonderful slides. See, look at all this. Man, you know, this. There, we're done. So, but that gives you some business about the religious strife that's going on there and some of the reasons for it. And I'm only 5 minutes late. If I'd done all of it, it would have been 15 minutes late. And so, and Teresa will tell you, I've wrestled over this. The original version of this was at least 20 more slides. And I realized, there's no way